pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Westwood Planning Board meeting. My name's Dave Atkins, and I'll be chairing this meeting. The meeting is video recorded by the Westwood Media Center. If anyone else wishes to record the meeting, please identify yourself so the audience is aware. I don't see anybody. As a friendly reminder, please turn off your cell phone ringers. The meeting will be civil, and all people will be treated respectfully. The format of the meeting will be that when an item is called, the applicant will come forward to the podium, which is over here tonight, to present their application to the board. The board will proceed to staff comments. Board members will ask questions of the applicant. For public hearing items, the public will be given an opportunity to comment. Items not requiring a public hearing, the opportunity for public comment will be at the discretion of the board. When it's time for the public comment period, the chair will call those wishing to speak to the podium to use the microphone. Once at the podium, please identify yourself by stating your name and address for the record. Please direct all questions and comments through the chair. All people will be given the opportunity to speak, but in the interest of time and fairness, repetitive or off-topic comments may be cut short. And I always remind people to please use the microphone so that it will be recorded properly, and remember to identify yourself. Are there any changes to the agenda, Abby?
No changes.
So the first item on our agenda is University Station, 80 University Ave, Project Development Review Public Meeting to discuss the construction of a two-story building, 40,000 square feet of office, surface parking, and associated site work.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, Paulson Carter with New England Development. Good evening. It's been a while since we've been before you, so it's good to see you all. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We're here this evening to talk about a proposal for a two-story office building on University Ave. It is, well, let me introduce the project team first, and then we can locate the building. So tonight with us is myself from New England Development, from National Development, one of our development partners that's been part of the development team since the inception of University Station, Katie Snyder from National Development, our architect Jeff Tompkins and John Carlson from SGA, and you'll recognize Nate Cheel from Tetra Tech is also with us this evening. Other folks that are part of the team, Shadley Associates, our landscape architect, not here this evening, and then the other disciplines that really fill out the building design aspect of the team. WB is the mechanical, McNamara Salvia is the structural. So just to refresh or to get people focused on where we are within University Station, the box highlighted in red down in the bottom right-hand corner of the plan identifies 80 University Ave, which again is the proposed two-story office building. It is a 20,000 square foot footprint. This is the normal orientation that you've been seeing University Ave for some time. So remember, north is to the right on this plan, and to orient people to the immediate, well, let's use the enlarged plan, and we'll work from there. This mic is not cooperating. So within what we call the lower campus area, the Makita office building, or I should say the two-story office building where the Makita would be the proposed tenant, is in this location here. Not Your Average Joe's there, Del Frisco's there, the recently opened Brigham and Women's in this location, and the residential condominium project that's under construction back in this corner. this future office building with potentially some retail in it is something that we'll talk about a little bit further when we get into detail. We'll also talk in a little bit more detail in terms of the actual limits of construction for the proposal that we have before you this evening. But roughly speaking, the office building construction will include the parking field in front of it and then the parking field that's to the south of the building. The future office building and this parking field would come with that future development. So what's before you is a project development review for this office building. It is nearly identical in layout to what the master plan is for this area. You may recall that the master plan was modified back when the Brigham and Women's proposal was made, and then subsequent to that, the Pulte was approved this past year in the same plan that's always been shown on the master plan. So the office building that we're talking about this evening is in the same location as it has been. The future office retail building is also in the same location. So it's important when we look at some of the site details to understand that really a lot of the engineering for this particular part of the site had been done in the master plan modification. The other thing to point out is the park, which was completed this past fall. You may recall that park was completed in time for the Brigham opening, with one exception, and is that a small area that abuts the Pulte area, which will be finished as the Pulte building is finished. And we had that staged completion on the park. To this point, I think you've seen in your packages the PDR submission. It includes a full set of site plans, the architectural, which Jeff will cover in a second. Beta, as has been the custom, has provided a real detailed comment letter to that package. We've met on several occasions between meetings with Mike Sinesi and the planning staff to review architecture, both prior to filing and then subsequent to filing. We've had an opportunity as recently as this morning to be able to review some of the comments and responses the responses that we've provided back to Merrick and his group. So I think there's been a fair amount of interaction with the peer review team that's really flushed out a number of the details. And so I think that when you hear from Merrick a little bit later on, you'll find that many of the details have been resolved, and they just need to be really followed through in terms of getting along the documents. Utilities to. Well, before we go to pedestrian connectivity, as I had said earlier, utilities to this particular building have all been anticipated with the development of the whole lower campus area. So they're essentially all stubbed into this area. And my pointer's not going to work. So drainage is consistent with the master drainage plan. You recall that part of the drainage here is for infiltration basins as well as treatment within catch basins and pre-treatment with water quality inlets and that sort of thing. The water and sewer connections were all stubbed into this area, so the building hooks up to those in those locations, as well as telephone, electric, and other data communications. Fire access and suitability for circulation for the fire department was reviewed when the master plan was modified last year, and recently we've been able to review it with Chief Deckers and just confirm that he's still satisfied that he has full access to the building, including even a detailed look in terms of where they'd like to be able to hook up to the building with the fire department connection on the building. Just let me run down my list and make sure we've touched on all of the primary site features, and then if there are more detailed site-related questions, then we can certainly get at them after Merrick's had a chance to run through his review. Trash and loading for this particular building is going to be located on the southern end of the building. It's here. Trash is all confined within the building. So the rollout containers will come out a service door on the south face, which Jeff can talk about a little bit more in detail. There is bike storage that's being provided for the facility. There are bike racks on the outside of the building. The landscape plan was prepared by Shadley, who's prepared all of the landscaping plans for the development. The palette of materials is consistent with the palette that's been used across the development. And I think we had received a few suggestions from Merrick's group on a couple of different species swap out, but essentially satisfies what's been typically used. Access and traffic and trip generation and all of that is also consistent with the master plan, so there were no changes to that. Last thing I'd like to touch on before I turn it over to Jeff is pedestrian circulation is also consistent with the pedestrian circulation diagram that we had walked through when we had prepared the master plan for this area. All of the red highlights show the sidewalk connections that connect you to the main sidewalks up and down University Ave that get you to the train station, as well as the retail across the street, to the park spaces that are up on the northern end of University Ave, as well as the park space that's just behind the Dedham Westwood Water District building. So we've been able to maintain those same pedestrian connections, and with the park in service now, it really provides a great link through the middle of the lower campus, and I think that as with the occupancy of the Brigham and Women building, you can actually see the physical connections, pedestrian connections through that park being made today. I think I've covered most of the highlights relating to sort of the site aspect, the application itself. Let Jeff walk through the architecture, and then we're happy to answer any detailed questions after that. Okay, Mr. Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Tompkins, partner, SGA Architects, Boston, Massachusetts. As Paul had pointed out, the two-story office building, approximately 40,000 square feet. It's just slightly under that. This plan is illustrative of how we're planning to use the building on its site, and how the user would end up using that building. We have a primary entrance here that's off of the Brigham Way side, a secondary entrance off of University Avenue. And when we get to the elevations, I can point out how we're identifying those entries architecturally speaking. There's an egress door over here, that entrance out to a long panel, the loading area up in here, as Paul pointed out, and when we get to the floor plans, I'll also point out how the trash will be confined within the building. And then there's also right here a little fitness door that the proposed tenant has asked us to accommodate, for their program. One of the things that we really like about this location and like about this building is its connectivity between Brigham Way and University Ave, and it's a really prominent corner. It's also what's driven the proposed tenant to look at this particular location. Also, the park land that's behind that, and the smaller parking facility that's contained and not necessarily visible from a lot of the streetways that you travel. So it does have somewhat of a suburban but also urban quality to it. Because all the parking is hidden. From a floor plan perspective, it's a very straightforward, what we typically call a center core building, even though it's not exactly in the center. But again, our entrances are almost centered on the building, and we've worked pretty hard to try to not make them be perfectly symmetrical. It's a 205. Its length on the University Ave side is 205 feet, and on the parking side is 210 feet because of some of these articulations on the corners. We can see here our trash and service access up in here. It's an office use. There's no food service in here, so it's largely paper that would be leaving this facility, and that will be held in recycling bins, and those recycling bins will be picked up by a service. So there's no dumpster outside per se. We have also located an egress here, additional tenant exit there, and the primary entrance and the secondary entrance, and then an additional tenant exit over here onto that lawn panel that they might want to utilize. Second floor, again, very straightforward, simple core, mostly designed to accommodate what I would call contemporary building occupants, which are largely open office spaces. We have not seen test fits for this plan yet, but we have talked to the proposed user's architect, and it's largely workstations with what we call huddle spaces that would be internal to the core. This is the view off of the perspective view off of Brigham Way, and I'll talk a little bit about the materials here on the building as we walk through it. Essentially, it's a masonry building, brick masonry, with punch windows as the vast majority of the facade, with flourishes of curtain wall and metal panel to identify the entries and to give it a little bit more character. Right now, we have, again, punch window masonry over here, metal panel facade flourishes with two-story curtain wall at the entrance along the Brigham Way parking facility. The University Ave rendering, as we can see as we're traveling south on University Ave, we see the north facade over here. We've wrapped the entry around to identify where that entry is, but we've also engaged a two-story entry over along the center of the building, along the University Ave. Most of the people that will access this building from a tenant standpoint and from a visitor standpoint will access it from the parking lot, but not the University Ave. But we felt fairly strongly, and working with Mike Sinesi, we've come up with a solution we feel works really well to maintain an entrance on University Ave. We think that really is helpful to future-proof the building in the event that it's not a single tenant, it turns into a multi-tenant user, and people do start using the University Ave entry. It's also relatively important that that's a heavily traveled way, and that this look, like a building that has a presence on University Ave itself. From a materials perspective, Katie, maybe I will have you do the Vanna White thing. If you walk that up there, it's not that heavy.
Yep. Bring it up here.
So from a materials perspective, we're bored with the actual materials. It's a light wing gray brick in a Norman brick size with a running bond and a gray grout. We have a slightly gray glass I did cut the back of it off, but we're inside, so it's probably going to reflect a little bit more than it really would. Spandrel panel in the areas in here where we wouldn't want to look through and see the structure of the building. Light gray metal panel for the surrounds, and a dark gray accent along the top where we have our standard coping, metal coping, and then the lighter gray and the aluminum window trim for the building. Flip through this. And then from the roof plane perspective, I think it's important to point out that part of the design concept in the entries, in both the entries on the parking side, the Brigham Way side, and the University Ave side, these elements that rise up above the roof are both to help identify the entry, but also to help screen any mechanicals up on the building. We do have roof screens. Those roof screens and the mechanical systems are in the renderings, and they are the sizes that they are proposed. So we feel we've done a fairly good job of trying to keep the screening of those materials consistent with what we would expect of an office building of this quality, but also so that we're just not looking at raw mechanical systems up on top of that roof. and that's really the presentation we have. So if there's any questions that I can answer or Paul can answer, we're certainly happy to entertain them.
Thank you. Let's see, I had a couple of initial questions just with the layout of the parking lot. So I'm wondering, we had a comment about for people accessing the building from the parking lot, it looks, why not have like a center walkway? Because it seems like everyone will have to walk directly across all the parking lot, and there's sometimes you have it, some places you'll have like the walkway in the middle, and then I'm just wondering about that design. Like, so there are sidewalks on either side, I guess, so where the trees are, but pretty much everyone's going to be in the parking lot and then walk through the parking lot to the entrance of the building. Is there a way to design it so that it's...
So certainly there's a sensitivity to trying to preserve as many parking spaces as we can. We'll be upfront about that, and there's a limited amount of real estate just in this general area down here, and the sidewalks, as you say, are on both sides. So it's a matter of balancing the parking demands for the user with the space that we have, and just sort of optimizing what we can do in the relatively small site that it is. It's just at 2 acres. So we opted to not lose those half a dozen or so spaces that you'd need to do in order to open one up down the middle. Bear in mind, it's also really, it's a couple of trays in width, where the longest distance from the building is not terribly substantial. So sort of it's not the deepest of parking fields. We felt it's certainly manageable given the size of the field that it is.
And this is with the 8.5-foot width spaces, which
correct.
is smaller than the rest of the development.
Right. So the thinking there is that within, certainly, we'll start with the zoning. So within the overlay district for University Ave doesn't necessarily specify 9 by 18 as an absolute minimum, which is part of the reason why it's not presented as a waiver request. If we've misunderstood that, we're certainly happy to talk more about it. But the sense was this use is dedicated office use, and the 8.5-foot width is something that we found to be perfectly manageable in an office setting where it's a much longer-term parking visit as compared to retail. And again, it's balancing the land that we have to work with and trying to meet the tenant demands on parking. So we're able to pick up a handful of extra spaces where we were able to use the 8.5 as opposed to 9 feet without compromising its operation.
And the area in gray, that would be the parking area for this building, so counting the spaces up on the left there up to the trees and then the big field.
So you know what, maybe they're in the back. Now I think it's worth, there is an exhibit that we have. So this is the layout drawing, which shows the paving limits that would come with this particular building construction. So it would be this entire lot. This would all be finished paved. The future spaces that might be for this building would be just a binder where they're apt to be impacted by construction. But this entire lot would be constructed, and then this travel lane would be constructed, and then everything in front of the building would be constructed. This remaining area, as you're probably aware, a portion of it is occupied by the Pulte sales and marketing trailer. And the areas that are outside of what Pulte finished off for their sales and marketing trailer would be re-loamed and seeded. They're currently loamed and seeded in any of the disturbed areas. There's a grading limit shown on our grading plan, which shows that roughly speaking, about another 25 feet beyond the paving limit will be where we transition our grades to the existing grades, and then reestablish loam and seed in those areas that are disturbed. One of the details that I neglected to mention is that the connection into the park, which has historically been shown on the master plan, is retained in this layout, and so there's a sidewalk that travels through an enlarged end cap island here and connects with that sidewalk connection that was anticipated in the park construction.
So there is a path through, basically, like from University, you come down here and you're into the park. Is that?
Yes. I thought we had a landscape plan that showed it a little bit clearer than. Abby, how do I get it back to the full picture? Yep, there we go.
There, that sidewalk is connected back to the university.
And let's see, where are the bike racks? Is there internal, or are there bike racks on the out? Okay, so there's kind of a path down there. There's bike racks pretty much interior to this structure, and then down to the park. Abby, would we go to, are there other staff comments we should have now, or ask other board members, or what's the next?
If you want to take board comments, we have Beta here tonight. We have Mike and Merrick here to report on their.
Would you guys like to report on your? Sure. Great. Thank you.
So my name is Merrick Turner with Beta Group, the peer reviewer for this particular PDR. I'm here with Mike Sinesi. Mike works on the architectural review. As Paul did a very good summary. I think, as he mentioned, I think one of the most important considerations here is the fact that the framework for this site, or the framing of this site, if you will, was really done in the 2017 master plan amendment, and the general layout, general access, general configuration was established there, and this plan remains very much consistent with that. And as a result of that, sort of key elements such as circulation, drainage, and so forth remain consistent, and certainly simplified the review. In terms of drainage, as was mentioned in the overall site, the key infrastructure in the master plan was developed in the park, which is a large infiltration area. Drainage comes down through the parking lot with pre-treatment, all consistent with those previous criteria. There is, I believe, a minor amendment that accompanied this that has been administratively improved, because there was a small change in square footage, really a redistribution of the square footage between these two buildings. There was originally some retail space in this location, which was shifted over to the future building next to it, and in turn the office space expanded, but total square footage, total use essentially remained the same between the two buildings. And I believe that's administratively approved already, correct?
Yes, okay. I did approve that last week as administrative approval that I uploaded in your packet, explaining that it was consistent with the master plan, but redistributed the space between those two buildings.
So from a traffic standpoint, we certainly don't have any concerns with a small change in terms of what would happen on University Ave in terms of access to Brigham Way and so forth. So traffic and drainage are consistent. As was also mentioned, the landscaping plans are utilizing similar materials, similar palette to elsewhere in the development. The landscaper is the same company that's been developing the overall landscape plan. There has, in some of the discussions, been some talk about a potential patio area on the north side of the building. I don't believe that's part of the current consideration. It doesn't appear to be reflected in the plans, and that's, I'm assuming, something that may come in the future if that's perceived as an appropriate use by the folks leasing the property. In terms of process, as was also mentioned, we have one comment letter before the board. We've received responses to those comments. Many of those comments or responses appear to resolve quite a few of the issues, and those that are not resolved, I don't think we see any issue in terms of actually working our way through those and resolving them satisfactorily. In terms of some outstanding issues, as was just mentioned there's a request for consideration of a slightly smaller parking space, 8.5 by 18. We do not have issue with that in this particular setting. It's something that I suspect the board is going to want to discuss. Public safety was mentioned. Again, the general aisle configurations and dimensions in the parking lot are consistent with elsewhere in the development, and therefore we would not expect, and we're hearing that the fire department is satisfied with the general access in and around the building, hydrant locations and so forth. The outdoor lighting plan, there's some revisions that we see being necessary for that. Just to clarify that the lighting plan for what is being built is actually satisfactory. The plan submitted in the initial application covered not only this lot, but the lot adjacent to it. So that just needs breaking down a little bit more. But again, we don't see a problem with reaching a satisfactory solution. The lighting standards in terms of the fixture types and so forth are consistent, again, with the overall development. Spill prevention, there was an O&M plan submitted. Generally the same format as that we've seen before. The O&M plan did indicate consideration of an emergency generator. There was some mention in response to comments that fuel type was undetermined. We would encourage that to be a gas supply as opposed to a fuel supply. I think any kind of fuel tank would be of concern to Dedham Westwood Water. The generator size, I would suggest we just understand that a little bit from a landscaping perspective, just to make sure it's properly screened. It's sited on this northerly corner here, next to the signage for the overall property. And then in terms of signage, there was not a signage application as part of the actual package, so I suspect that would become a condition at such time a decision is reached. But overall, again, just to reiterate the fact that given the consistency with the master plan, we didn't see a lot of significant issues during the review. And I can have Mike just come up and speak to the architecture too.
Thank you, Merrick. Mike Sinesi, a peer review architect. I'm with DSK Architects. As Merrick just mentioned, we felt that the design as it came to us was very clean. There were just a few issues that we brought to the attention of the team, and those were quickly resolved. We were very happy with the overall design. It was consistent with the siting and the placement with the master plan, forming a strong edge along University Ave, and then opening itself up toward the south, toward the east, toward the parking area. This corner is interesting, and it provides some relief to the mass of the building all around, the punched windows and the masonry building. When the design was originally presented to us, the side facing University Ave along here, on the right-hand side of this rendering, was inconsistent with the rest of the curtain wall area, and together, we were able to bring that together and bring unity to the overall design with curtain wall and the same type of treatment, metal panel treatment around. Another question was the appropriateness of the color of the brick and the mortar with respect to the softer, warmer colors found elsewhere in the development. But given the typology of this building as an office building, whereas many of the other buildings are residential buildings or commercial retail buildings, this has a seriousness, a grounded nature to it, and it somewhat recedes back and is not as sort of animated as the retail spaces and some of the residential spaces would be. The coloration and the tonality of the brick and the metal panel, however, is consistent with some of that metal panel that would be seen on the gables, for example, and some of the other developments. So I think it will fit nicely into the context of the overall development, yet retain its own identity as a commercial office building. The placement of the openings and the doors around the site are very clean, no trash. It's all contained from within, so it's a very tight and uniform envelope all around. Initially, we had a concern about one of the rooftop screens being open to the east, and that was immediately turned, and they oppose one another. They face one another as sort of a C and a D, if you will, so that those openings are screened, and the equipment on the roof will be completely screened. We were told that there would be no building-mounted lighting. No facades would not be illuminated for dark sky, preservation of dark sky. And the signage package will wait for when that is presented to us. So that's it.
Yep, so that's the scope of our review.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Visiting, any questions from board members?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you went to that 9-foot space, how many spots do you lose? So right now it's at 170, is that what you said?
107?
8 or 9.
It's about half a dozen.
Half a dozen, okay. And I was just wondering, with your experience with other businesses, I know that there's more telecommuting and things of that nature. Are you finding that there's a need for more spaces with some of your other business buildings?
SGA does 50% of our business is interior design, so we do we actually fit out a lot of these buildings for other folks, and we are finding that the whole telecommuting rage has seen its demise. People are now basically mandating that people come to work. You might have shift changes or even day changes. You might have 4 days a week. Somebody might come in, but the vast majority, we have not seen a dramatic decrease in parking as a result of that. Unfortunately, because we are advocating typically less parking. So,
Talk about the sort of the square footage per person kind of.
Oh, yeah,
how that's
sure.
evolved over the years.
I mean, typically on a building of this nature, an office building of this nature, I would say even 10 years ago, we would plan 200 to 250 square feet per person on a rentable basis. So that number is actually a little bit less than gross, not much, but a little teeny bit less than gross. Now we are seeing the average rentable square foot per person in an office building is around somewhere between 90 to 160. So, with the decrease of the telecommuting rage and the advent of having more people per square foot, we're actually starting to see some projects that don't have the general access to commuter rail as this one does. So if you moved a little bit further west of here, we have clients asking for 5 per 1,000 parking, which is just not attainable in most sites. We're starting to see parking garages be built in western suburban office parks.
So you're feeling that you'll need every one of those 170?
Yeah, you never done an office building where every parking space wasn't utilized.
Yeah.
And in most cases, when we have office buildings, when we think we might stage the utilization of that building, what we typically do is grade the site for it, and we might loam and seed that. But almost always, we come back within 18 months' time and fill those spaces with real spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Abby, what's the size of the parking spots across the street by like Wegmans and Target? Are those 9?
They're all 9 by 18. So this would be, they're looking for 8.5 width. So it's a width change, still the 18 foot with 24-foot aisles.
Does that include the handicap spots as well? Or?
Yes.
No, all the dimensions of the accessible spaces will remain as they are throughout the entire development, which are really dictated by the accessible space standards. So it's taking 6 inches out of the space that would be utilized for an office visit as opposed to, and really I think the distinction here is that the retail customer, the turnover of space is a lot more frequent than that of an office space. And we've, in the response to the comments, we identified about a half a dozen communities that use 8.5 by 18 as a standard. We were able to visit a good number of those facilities just to see for ourselves that 8.5 is an appropriate width for an office type use. We have in our portfolio, and I know that National Development has in their portfolio parking lots that are designed with the 8.5-foot width, but we did visit a number of others. So I think in our view, it's very appropriate for the office use. A lot of the retailers prefer the 9, frankly.
Thank you.
I had some questions. My concern is not so much the 8.5, although I think anyone that's been in a parking lot appreciates the more space, the better. I do like Mr. Atkins' comment about some sidewalk accessibility up the middle. It does, in looking at the parking lot configuration, it does look like if you're parking in the middle and you're walking clear across all parking lot, and you're going to take the straightest, the straight line path. You're not going to walk over to the side by Brigham Way or to the other sidewalk you indicated as being available. You're going to walk through the parking lot. And it just looks to be a long way if you're parked far away from the building to have to go all the way through that, especially in the winter where you're navigating snow piles and things like that. So I appreciate you're trying to get all 170 spaces in, but I don't know how many would be forfeited by a path there, maybe 8 or so, 7 or 8, 6 or 8. But it's just something that I would like to see considered. No need to, I understand, you don't have to respond to that, just that's my consideration. So did the tenant or proposed tenant request all 170, or is this something you're just seeing, so you just want to get as many as possible?
So in this instance, the lease with the tenant is to provide 170.
Okay.
I think mathematically it was about 4 and a quarter spaces per 1,000. So it's.
And I know the building next door, is there a time frame that you have in mind of building that and developing that parking area?
Right now, there isn't.
Okay. But that's proposed to be the new retail office area, right?
Correct.
And what does retail do to the parking that the office doesn't in the new configuration? Has it changed like office space parking lot? Or does it remain the same?
In terms of the number of spaces?
Right.
Short answer is no. Somewhere in the 4 to 5 per 1,000 for retail generally satisfies most retailers. And time will tell with the kind of demand that comes for that building. And so there's no clear set amount of retail square footage or office square footage. As the master plan has been all along, we have placeholder placeholder, buildings and uses, and so.
And I'm looking at the one on the left. My concern is going to be revisited, as Mr. Atkins pointed out, that's just a lot of asphalt with no interruption, right? So again, not only aesthetics, but I think from safety, from just ease of use, I think a walking path there down the middle would be optimal. Can you talk more about the trash? No dumpster on site? You said only paper leaving the site, but we all know people are having lunch in there or something. What?
No, that's correct. So that'll get picked up at the end of the day, but it'll be picked up by a service and taken off site at the end of the day.
And held where?
It's held in the
Inside the building?
trash room inside the building.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Oh, is the same with recycling?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there was a discussion that the design team had very early on. This is a rare building that has 4 very prevalent sides to it. There's really no place to put a dumpster. So there's also no place to screen it and no place to make it look like the screening is consistent with the rest of the building. So it's being kept inside.
So
It's only 40
world, you don't see it, but it's there.
It's there.
It's being taken care of.
It's being taken
You just
care of.
won't see it.
Right, and if I would say if this were a larger building, if this were not a 2-story, 40,000 square foot building, which is a relatively small office building, I would have a very different concern. If this were 150,000, 200,000 square foot building, it would be a very different concern.
Okay. And there was a concern by Chief Deckers about reducing the size of the island for access, I think, from Brigham Way coming in, or down to 12 inches. Was that, Abby, is that
Yes.
in our notes?
They did. The fire department, after a meeting yesterday, they had some questions on reducing the size of one of the islands a little bit.
I presume that to mean coming off of Brigham Way, it might be tough to navigate if the parking lot is full.
What we agreed with Chief Deckers on is actually reflected on this plan. So the fire department connections at the building will be located on this facade as close, their preference is as close to this corner as possible, and they wanted to be sure that they weren't working in between parked vehicles to be able to get their hoses connected up to the building, so that they asked that we stripe out this space for fire department access and then sign it as such. So this space is limited as a parking space, and one of the consistencies changes that you'll see in the final drawings is this space was replaced with the space up there to be able to offset the loss of that parking space. So now they're assured a pathway to the south facade of the building to be able to make that connection.
Okay. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was architecture. As I understood, in the creation of the UAMUOD, there was going to be where the buildings related to one another. And it seems to me that there's a distinct difference going down University from the train station. On your right are the Gables and Wegmans and the other storefronts that come up to University. On your left is Not Your Average Joe's, Del Frisco, Brigham, and there's a distinct difference to me in the architecture, and this represents more of the Del Frisco to me and the Not Your Average Joe's. And I think it was fine, but those were developed far away from University Avenue in the original part of the project. And it seems like now we're moving back towards the project, but we're maintaining that architecture that started away. And I look at this, and right across the street is the Gables, and I heard Mike mention some relation, or I can't recall exactly what you were referring to, but I see 2 entirely different architectural styles, at least in my mind's eye, of what the Gables looks like. And I just have a little concern, not that I don't like what this looks like, but are we honoring the UAMUOD from the outset, that there's relativity or relationship between the buildings throughout the whole project, or have we moved and migrated away from that, because that still is in our bylaws. We have to honor that. So I'm a little concerned that now that we are moving back towards the gables and the phase one of the project, the two don't look at all similar to me. So I don't know if Mike can speak to, I know you were satisfied with that there is, so I'd like to hear a little bit more about why you're satisfied. My knee-jerk reaction is this looks entirely different from Wegmans and Gables, and I don't see anything that is remotely similar.
Sure. Mike Sinesi again. The reason I feel comfortable with this is because the Gables has masonry in it as well. It has brick. It has red brick. This has gray brick, but they're brick. And then there are metal panels on both buildings as well. There are gray metal panels. There are lighter taupe-colored panels on the Gables as well, but there are metal panels on this building as well. So materially, there's consistency between the materials, but the color may vary between the two. The Gables is a residential building, and this is an office building. And generally in architecture, unless we're dealing with a deep urban condition, we try to allow the building's typology to be reflected in its material and in its form. In this case, there's a seriousness, sort of a sedate quality to it, whereas in the Gables, it's much more animated. It has a lot of variety. Every panel within that the elevations of the building is different, giving it unique, sort of almost like a residential quality, like as you drive down the street, you would be disappointed if every house looked the same and was of the same color. And we want variety in our residential neighborhoods, but within our and generally throughout. For this as an office building, I think it has a nice modern, forward-thinking character. But it still makes relationship to the overall context. We did ask the applicant about the use of stone, which is a nice, it had originally been taken from the site, I think, Paul, but in any case, in some instances, but made a reference to throughout the buildings. And they've opted to use that stone in site walls around the building. But not on the building itself, which I was willing to accept. And then the use of curtain wall is more consistent with what you might see over at Brigham, at the Brigham building.
Yeah, it does to me. It just looks like it's that side of the road. And maybe what I'm referring to is it's more monochromatic than the other side. And so there's a stark difference. And taken separately, it doesn't offend me at all. I don't mind it at all. But looking at my left side to this, to my right, the Gables, it just looks unbalanced in my mind. I'm sure once it goes up, it'll have a different appearance than what my mind is imaging to myself. But it's just a thought I had, a concern I had when reviewing this. So I wanted to ask more questions and have a little bit more elaboration on the comments about the architecture.
Sure.
And there's the names as they appear. They will not be backlit or lit up at all. The tenant name.
We've asked for a signage package, and we're told that would be forthcoming.
Okay, so that is going to be included in the signage package. Okay, not the building lighting, which we've been told will not be lit up. But there's a possibility that this will be lit up. Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You did. Thank
Mike,
you.
Did you have any questions?
I do not, no.
Let's like to open it up unless there's any other staff comments or anything. I'd like to see if there's any public comment. Would anyone like to come forward and share their thoughts? Mr. Olenoff?
Steve Olenoff, 52 Glanville Road, associate member of the planning board. For a long time, we've been waiting for that pathway from the railroad station to the parking lot, and I'm wondering, where is it? What's the status on that? I think that should be a condition of this occupancy permit, that that path be there in use, because certainly this is a great opportunity for people to be able to take the train to work and walk to work, but they need that path to get easily from the station to this. So I wanted to know from the developer, what is the status of that?
Is it a multi-part question?
No.
Okay. So our application has been pending for a long time with Amtrak, and it's unfortunately in the same status, which is we're still waiting to have Amtrak act on our request to make the connection that Steve talks about, which I think most are familiar with. Which is, it's behind the hotel building, so the courtyard is here, and some of you may recall some of the details where the sidewalk is nearly fully constructed down to the property line with the railroad, so it's grassed right now and ready to receive pavement just as soon as Amtrak grants us permission to be able to utilize what is an emergency egress door today, which would be converted into a public access door. And that's the idea that's been around since the inception of the development. And it's just been hard to get Amtrak's focused attention on it. And so we continue to call on a regular basis and prod that application.
All right, so I think, I remember we discussed this with Del Frisco's, we discussed it with the hotel, we discussed it with Pulte probably, and it's just, so you're saying that you're ready to go as soon as you get the approval, which has been out there for 2-3 years.
Correct.
Waiting.
We've engaged folks from the T as well to try to help and influence moving this along with Amtrak. Jurisdictionally, the way the station works, Amtrak has jurisdiction and responsibility for the train station building itself, and the T has responsibility for the parking structure. So that's how it's divided. So this is it's an Amtrak matter, and we've had materials into them for as you say, at least a couple of years, and I think it's just it's a large organization. It probably is not one of the biggest requests that they're dealing with, and trying to get their focused attention on it just has been a challenge.
Does the decision-making lie solely within them, or do they have to answer to Homeland Security, or are there some bigger concerns why this might be being delayed?
I'm not sure that it's actually Homeland Security that weighs in, but we certainly think that in let's say the almost 8 years now, really since the start of this conversation, which was in 2011 and 12 when the master plan was developed, and for those that go back even further in time, this was an element that came out of the prior project that was retained in University Station. So it's in excess of 10 years. A lot's changed in the world, and so we've always felt that Amtrak Security would look at it maybe a lot differently today than they did 10 years ago. We've not been told that that's been the issue hanging it up. Frankly, it's just hard to get people to focus on what it is they may need from us. We've certainly provided all that's been asked, and there's nothing outstanding that they're looking for from us. It's in the queue.
I guess our big question would be who can prioritize that queue, because we've tried things, Abby, haven't we? Or we have.
Right, but
we don't have.
So may I make a suggestion that Paul give us the contacts of people he's been working with at Amtrak, and then we should put pressure on them through various ways to make this happen, even going as far as getting our congressman to put pressure on them, because this has to happen, and if it's not happening, we have to make it happen. So could we do that, Paul? And the only other thing is I share the views that we talked about the lack of pedestrian friendliness with this building. There's some features that are good, but not having a straight way across the parking lot to the front door is less than pedestrian friendly. We are committed. We are a complete streets town, and we should be trying to make things as pedestrian friendly as we can.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? All right, I'm thinking that we would probably continue this so that there's additional time in between meetings for them to respond to any other questions or feedback and all, and then we would vote on it at the next meeting. But I think I wanted to get a sense of if we've given, I agree with what Mr. Olenoff said. I'd like to see some creative way to address the safety and pedestrian issues there. I think, I could see maybe having, what if you had the spaces that are closer to the building could be 8.5 feet, and then the rest of the parking lot could be 9 feet. I know it's kind of things are trading off here and there, but I just feel like you're going to have a big parking area with people having difficulty getting into the building. So I would like to see some.
Well, one of the things that we'd like to do is consider creating the pathway through the middle of the lot, which would involve elimination of spaces. I think it makes more sense to keep the spaces uniform. They're either all 8.5s or 9s, but I think the idea of creating the pathway is most effective if you look at eliminating spaces to create that pathway. And then, in so doing, you would have an 8.5-foot wide, striped out designated pedestrian way.
And where would the overflow? Because actually, I work in a similar situation where they've crammed more people into the building, and the parking lot spaces are 9 feet, and it feels pretty tight. But the overflow goes into a neighboring sort of abandoned parking lot. Is there anywhere in the development here, what would happen when the lot fills up? I guess sort of trying to imagine where people would park.
So for the immediate future, when this building is not adjacent to the future building next door to it, the lot that is to the south of the building, the side lot, if you will, the one that fronts right on University Avenue, will be built out in its entirety. And the designation of spaces involves only half of that lot, so I think that serves as the overflow for the time being. And then once the second building is constructed and it's essentially one continuous field, then in practice, there really will be a little bit more of a shared.
Until that time, I see them parking at Not Your Average Joe's, because no one's eating lunch at 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's going to be open. Sure. That's where I would park if I was forced and there was nowhere else to go.
Well,
Right, I'm saying if that was even full.
If that's full, right. And I think if that lot is full and there truly is an overflow into the restaurant parking area, then we're pushing numbers that would exceed, or they'd be bumping up certainly at 5 per thousand, which we just wouldn't expect here. And it surely becomes a parking management problem, but frankly, we need to manage the restaurant parking area very carefully today and have been for years because of the temptation for people that are using the commuter rail.
I think having that pedestrian walkway down the middle for an 8.5-foot space, for me, that's acceptable. I think that.
I think it also kind of breaks things up so that instead of having that long row, what you're proposing now is a bunch of 8.5 spaces down, there's 20 spaces next to each other. So if you break that up and you have 10, 9 and 9, that's probably a little, in addition to having the safety of the central walkway, the closer together spaces, there's less need for people to cut between the cars. So, yeah, I would tend to favor some redesign that includes a central path.
Yeah, so I make a motion to continue the review of the project development review to the next meeting on Tuesday, February 12th, in the same room at 7 p.m. at 50 Carby Street. And we request that the applicant submit revised plans addressing the comments from tonight's meeting, and Beta's comments as well.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. This will be continued to February 12th.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Abby, we'll leave the material boards with you folks.
Okay, yep, sure. We can, want to stick it back up there? Thanks. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is 200 University Avenue. This is a continuation of a EIDR public hearing. It's been continued from February 5th, or from September 5th.
Please take your conversations outside. We still have a meeting to conduct.
So this 200 University Ave, you may come to the podium and present your updates.
Yep. Yep. Hi, Albert Fine, Fine Associates. I've been working with this owner for about 20 years. I'm the architect of their current headquarters on Dartmouth Street. They also have investment properties that I have worked on. Simply put, the interior scope of the building is code compliance. We have already put in fire alarm. We've already retrofitted the sprinkler system to code. We intend to, and we're going to do some minor finish work. And then there's no real reconfiguration within the building, and one egress stair will be added over here, because there are 3 suites and 1 suite does not have sufficient egress. The exterior scope includes tearing off the roof, which is very, very old, and replacing it with code-compliant insulation, a new rubber membrane, and associated accessories. We intend to reconstruct the entire parking lot, put in compliant drainage, put in compliant lighting, and straighten out the utilities. So to talk about the parking lot is Bob Crucial, who's the engineer from Hancock Associates.
The property is 43,561 square feet, or exactly 1 acre.
The parking requirement is 25, and we provided 25. They're indicated by these squares. Each zoning space, according to zoning, has a box 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 25. Circulation works like this. Cars going northbound come into a one-way. The one-way parking configuration, sizes, the travel aisle, they all meet zoning. Then it transitions into a two-way. Keep in mind, of course, we all know this is a retrofit, so we don't have the ideal situation the building exists. So it transitions into a two-way, and we have parking spaces here lined up against the building. Currently, there are 4 truck docks on the building. 2 are going to be retired, 2 will remain active, the 2 center ones. The ones on the outer edges will be retired. There'll be enough truck bay for 2 trailers in this location here. There's a concrete pad that exists, and that will remain. Then we'll have the remainder of the parking off to the side here. Drainage is all compliant with stormwater management ordinance. What do we switch to? Okay, it's a little hard to read here because of the contours. Contours are 10-foot intervals. The drainage is rather flat there, so in order to make sure there's positive drainage everywhere, these are 10-foot contours and not full contours. What we're going to do is put in a catch basin here at the entrance off University Avenue. It's going to connect to another catch basin here. The positioning of those 2 catch basins allows us flexibility to put in the ADA parking. The ADA parking will be here to serve this portion of the building and that entrance, and then another ADA space over here to serve this entrance over here. That allows us to will flatten out the space. You can see the contour interval here, it gets wide apart. That means it's 1.5%. And then the fact that it's on this side allows us to get into the building easier, provide a flat spot, and then provide positive pitch in the drainage system on the far side of the parking lot. The high point here, drainage to those two catch basins is flowing in this direction. And then out here in the main truck area, we have another catch basin in the center. And then we have a catch basin on the easterly side to, some of you may have visited that site. And right now there's a tendency for ponded water to sit right there. So we put a catch basin there. We've also provided, and that's going to be filtered. We've got treatment chambers here, storm tech type. So water is treated here, first 1 inch, and then the overflow goes to a connection to the 4 to 8 inch drain in Dartmouth Street. Excuse me. We've also provided infiltration for the roof, 1 inch. There's downspouts in the building located here, 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 and here. We're connecting them up, putting them into a similar array of storm tech underground chambers, 2 feet down, 2 feet of cover rather, into the ground. Soils are good, and we don't expect any problems with the infiltration itself. The utilities are all there. If you go to the next one. Right now, the utilities are water, sewer, gas, and this is the communications and overhead power. These are all in place, and there's no expansion of the building, no more loading necessitated by what we're proposing to do. We do have a couple of issues with crossing. We, of course, don't know exactly the elevation, the height elevation of the utility, so we're calling for some exploratory test pits as the first step of the contractor's work. So that, as an example, he's going to test pit this drain where it crosses the water. And if there's any kind of a conflict, we'll know that right up front in the work, and then we can deal with it, relocate the water if necessary, and that sort of thing. I think that's about it. You happy to answer questions?
Thank you. Did we have any immediate questions?
So where did you say the main entrance was to the building?
There are actually 3 entrances.
3 entrances?
There are 3 suites. This is entrance here, which is to what is mostly warehouse. This is an entrance here, which is office here and warehouse here. And this is an entrance here for about 1,000 square foot office suite.
And there's accessible spots, because the last time I was down there, there was one spot that was further away from the main entrance. So those will all have accessible spots near them?
Yes. There and there.
Let's see, we had a report from Beta on this also, right?
Right. We have Merrick here tonight from Beta, so he's filling in for Phil, but you did get a memo from Phil and Chris of Beta. There was some back and forth with some requests, but we did get some revised plans on Friday and some lighting plans yesterday that was uploaded in your packet. But I think the only outstanding item was the request for the lighting. And the lighting plans that we got yesterday, there was just a dark spot in the rear parking spaces, so I would ask for another a final revised lighting plan that include lighting those spaces in the back there. But otherwise, all the stormwater comments were included in the Friday's submission of an updated stormwater report and the updated site plans.
So could we make that a condition for the lighting plan, since it's...
And we're fine with that. What I'd like to do is have the opportunity, the lighting is being done by Apex Lighting, and what I'd like to do is have them see if they can spread the fixtures apart a little bit more, but if we have to add a fixture, we have to add a fixture.
And where did the bike rack end up on there? I was trying to find that, but... Okay. So that's right near the warehouse, the entrance that's the office in the warehouse.
Well, there are other places to put it. I don't think that's something, it may actually make more sense to put it near one of the office entrances where the bigger office space, because that's likely more people will work.
Yeah, my thought is that it's likely there could be an employee who would bike commute.
Sure.
Not much use by the warehouse, but I don't know, maybe the person is.
Eventually, as you probably know, eventually the contents of this building goes to 240 University Ave. When Dacon's project, when 240 University Ave is done, they will move all of this product. The product in the building is their oversupply and discontinued items, because they have clients around the country. When a lock breaks, they need another lock that's 10 years old. So the likely scenario is this will be rented. So we don't know what's coming.
Let's see, if there's no other questions, I know there are a couple of waivers requested, right? There's the traffic impact study and presentation model.
Yes, those are the two waivers.
So I move to waive the waivers that you just mentioned because they're not necessary for the scope of the project for the redevelopment of an existing building.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? So we grant the waivers. Let's see.
I just had Merrick, is there anything that we're not addressing that Beta is?
I'm looking at Phil's memo here. The only thing that he highlights is
The lighting.
plan, which he calls out as a condition. Everything else looks fairly clean. Issue resolved. Stormwater was all updated satisfactorily.
I see one here, a dumpster or trash location. Did you point
yes.
that out here? I didn't.
I forgot it was.
Identified a wood screen, but I've got issue resolved here.
I did see it on one of the other plans.
This is the landscape.
Okay. As long as,
Right
okay.
here.
And Abby, you're satisfied with how it's presented?
Yes, so that was one of the revisions, was adding a dumpster and a bike rack over here.
That's a good spot for the dumpster, because that's probably where the most trash is going to be generated, given that that's a warehouse.
The warehouse, right. Okay.
Is there any public comment? Would anyone like to say anything from the audience? All right.
Oh, and I'll just add, the applicant has also filed with the conservation agent under the stormwater bylaw for that additional stormwater review.
Should we go through each of the conditions?
Oh, yeah, so I had prepared a draft of 11 conditions. Most of them were pretty standard, but condition 1, to summarize, was that the dumpster be screened at all times and the gates be closed. The exterior lights be turned off an hour after close of business unless they're security lights, and request the applicant to submit the final revised lighting plan to me for review and approval. The trees and the landscaping, there was a few trees being added and some new grass out front, some plantings. Those should be done prior to occupancy, unless it's done prior to April 15th, and we'd recommend a condition that the landscaping be completed by May 30th. The applicant shall contact the Department of Public Works at least 48 hours in advance to be present during the site work for the drainage, to inspect that. That there's no use of the sodium chloride rock salt for de-icing or snow removal. The applicant shall repair any damage that may be caused during construction to the roads or anything in the right-of-way. First, contacting the Department of Public Works. The applicant shall submit the asbestos survey to the building commissioner and health department. Also, if there's any need for licensing with the Board of Health, that's also required for the construction debris. And then also applicant is responsible for any other filings that may be required and keeping a copy of this decision on site during construction.
So I make a motion to approve the EIDR application for 200 University Ave as shown on the site plans and stormwater report revised through January 25th with the conditions previously stated.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. This is a public hearing, so we should close the public hearing.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? We close the public hearing. And I think that's it for this item. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, the next item on our agenda is Morgan Farm Estates, definitive subdivision bond reduction request for Phase 2. Abby, are you going to walk us through that?
Yes, okay. If you recall, this request had come in December, and there was a discrepancy on the number of trees. So I have since walked the site with a developer and approved a final landscape planting plan to determine that exact number of trees that are left to be planted are 16. So I believe I had a updated amount that I reviewed with Phil. Where I put that. Okay. So I recommend, after reviewing with Phil, that you hold $19,546 in the bond for Phase 2. That will cover the remaining work. So I have a recommended
Trees and the paving?
trees and some final work, all the final items. That's what it comes to.
Okay.
So it's a reduction of $28,600. For Phase 2. There's still a little bit of funds, I think, in Phase 1 as well. Phase 1 was the first part of the road. Phase 2 was from the bridge to the end where the final houses are being constructed. So some of those final paving work would be further along.
Do we need, what do you need us to?
You do need a motion here. I don't know if you had a chance to review. A motion to reduce the amount of funds held in the tri-party agreement for Phase 2 of Morgan Farm. Oh, and I'd also suggest that you impose a condition that all the street trees be installed by May 30th, and prior to any further bond releases. Sorry, I didn't realize.
I'm sorry, Deb, I did not see that you had, did you miss this discussion, or did you hear the Morgan Farm Estate stuff?
Oh, sorry, no.
Abby, could you just kind of?
Sure. For Morgan Farm Estates, a subdivision, the planning board has a tri-party agreement, and the developer has requests a reduction of funds for work in Phase 2. So I did recommend, I reviewed with Phil Paradis in advance and walked the site to verify which trees had been planted and how many were left to be planted. That was what we were still working out at your last meeting. So I recommend you reduce the bond by, $28,600, so that there's $19,546 left in the tri-party agreement for Phase 2 of Morgan Farm. And I recommend a condition that all street trees be planted by May 30th and prior to any further bond releases.
I don't have any comments. Do we need?
Does anyone have anything to say on this? Mr. Prepatera, would you like to speak to this? I need the microphone because it won't pick you up from back there.
You asked.
Joe Privatera, 16 Dean Street. Do you folks have any documentation, because Mass DEP and the Westwood Conservation Commission requires 2 growing seasons for the trees? Do you have any documentation before you that's gone through 2 growing seasons before you release any funds on this bond? Do you?
Some of them have been planted. I'm not sure how long ago.
You have to go 2 years. You have to go 2 years before you can sign off on anything on this.
I think from their last release was, I think September or October of 2017.
That's the last time we.
That was the last time we released funds.
Did a reduction? And was that based on plantings?
There were some in there at that time.
So your
DEP's pretty clear. You got to go 2 growing seasons. If you don't have that documentation, you ought not be releasing bond funds, because we've been down this road before. They've had to go and replant. Don't release the funds unless you go through 2 growing seasons. Thank you.
Thank you.
This project was also reviewed separately by the Conservation Commission. They do have I believe there's an order of conditions by the Conservation Commission.
If you don't have the documentation, I wouldn't do it.
How many seasons has it been?
Well, you're included, in the remaining amount is still funds for the trees that still need to be included, that still need to be planted. So those haven't been planted yet.
Right, so obviously
I
it's
don't
0
know.
for the ones that haven't been planted,
Yeah.
so. I mean, there's.
I don't know how long it's been since the last plantings.
Yeah, why don't we just get the documentation, bring it back to next meeting. I mean,
Well,
it's,
is that our bylaw that has to be 2, or is it conservation's, or? I mean, are we sure of all this, or we're not sure?
Well,
It's not specific to planning board.
Okay.
It's, I think, DEP, which usually is covered under the Conservation Commission.
I don't mind waiting 2
I don't
weeks
know.
just to check it.
Right.
yeah, why don't we just do that, and we'll come back to
We'll see where we stand and go from there.
Do we need a motion?
Point of order, Dave. If you get a copy of the order of conditions, you'll see, Mike, that it says 2 growing seasons.
All right.
Do we need a motion?
I think we just move on, because it wasn't, this was just we take no action, and we'll take action at the next meeting if we.
Sounds good.
All right. So, the next item, open space and recreation plan, public hearing. Continued from December 11th. So, we are, the timeline here, basically this, in order to get this to town meeting, we have another planning board meeting on the 12th, another on the 26th, and there's a FinCom meeting on March 4th. So we kind of, that's the sort of space we have to work in. We got a presentation at the last meeting where Nora Locknane took us through what the plan was. We had some feedback at that, and I think some people have provided written comments, but I think we need to pull together all the comments and input that we can tonight, and probably continue this to the next meeting to vote on it, I think is the thing. We did present this to FinCom, and I think kind of the obvious thing that has come up, and we have in the materials here a letter from the board for the select board. And the first thing that everybody has the same reaction we did, which was that the first goal of pursuing adoption of the CPA does not seem to be a good goal for this plan. And it's not that people might think it's a good idea to have a CPA, but I feel like this is a plan about open space and recreation, and we should focus on those elements there. So I think that's the feedback, Abby, that you've gotten from me. I don't know if anybody disagrees with that, but I would take that goal out and express it as one of the possible implementation options, to say that we will determine if the town would support this, we should pursue other things.
I
such
think
as-
we agreed with that at the last meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have, you have in front of you tonight, and today we did upload to your packet an updated plan with those comments. So we've taken the goal 1 out and put that into the action table as a source of funding. Let me just pull it up here. I think the goals start on page 68. So what you have in front of you and what we have posted on in your packet and on the website are all the comments that at least that we heard so far from your discussions at the last planning board meeting. Those are and any comments we received. So you did also in your packet, you received a letter from the Commission on Disability, the Council on Aging Director, the Select Board did have that same concern. They supported the plan, but were concerned about having the CPA as a goal and requested that that be considered as a funding source rather than a goal.
See, so I had some thoughts here that I think Abby sent this email out, but what I was thinking was I want to quickly go through my own comments here and see if others have, I'd like to go through and their general comments, then get public feedback and kind of see if from there if we can summarize if there's anything else we're missing. I think that one thing is that all of the goals, and this is sort of a buzzword, but they should be SMART-er, which means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So like a goal that says, enhance the community character is very vague. It's not very specific. And even the other goals, there's the goal for the ice, it's increase ice skating opportunities. And I think that it would be smart to rework them to things that are more specific, to say, if you want, in the next 5 years, build an indoor ice skating facility accessible to all residents for recreation and sports throughout the year. So in general, to look at the goals and tighten them up so that they are something that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and has a time frame on them. I think that would make it a stronger plan. And if people disagree with a particular goal, it would be better to just get it out there and then discuss it. And if it's total disagreement, take it out. But as opposed to sort of watering things down into sort of general aspirations. I'd like to see specific commitments of resources, like saying, designate town staff to devote a certain % of the time to apply for grant funding, or and goals to secure a certain number of grants, things like that, like within the implementation steps. I think that there are things like that there, but.
Right. We didn't incorporate some of those specific goals into the plan because we really think this is a town-wide plan. They're more specific than you would find in an open space and recreation plan. They're more than just objectives or requests for specific, the fundings and time frame. That's too specific for this kind of plan. So that's why we.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. As much as I'd want them to be, to have those types of strong elements, I don't think that it's.
I think that there should be, and as I think we saw some of the comments, accessibility should be a part of these goals, and maybe as a general goal to ensure that all these enhancements are reviewed to make reasonable efforts so that what's done will be accessible and usable for all residents. So it's kind of, that sounds like something to apply to all of the goals. Say instead of thinking of increased ice skating opportunities, you'd say, well, let's have a rink that can be used for hockey and for public skating and for other things. And so
right,
generally,
we can combine. I mean, we can combine goal 2 from the recreation goals. With goal 5 of the. I mean, we need indoor facilities, and we need an ice rink. We've needed a lot of those things for many years. They can be combined into one project. All right? We can lay them out as individual goals, or we can group them together. As long as we're moving in that direction, I think, I agree, it doesn't need to be so specific as to what's going to get done, when it's going to get done, and how we're going to fund it. It's basically just a template or a roadmap of where we want to get to. But we make it too specific, and then we're going to have pushback from, people want to go another direction. They don't want this. They don't want, and it's not about getting this or getting that. This is the direction we want to move towards.
Yeah, I think Dave was okay with that. I think he just wanted to add accessibility to, and I think that can be one of the, I'd be surprised if that wasn't in here already.
Forgive me if I misunderstand, but I'm not really sure what you mean by accessibility.
Well, I think one is just, so like for the open space items, accessibility is, say there's a parking lot at Lowell Woods, there should be some handicapped accessibility to that. Maybe there's a need to have a better parking for that. There's that type of accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
There's also accessibility in the sense of, like for Morrison Field, there's not enough parking, and we're relying on the parking at CVS and everything. We should think about, are there ways to use other parking lots? Whenever we expand these types of things, we should think about making it accessible so that people can get there and go to go do the event there. So like for Morrison Field in particular, there might be an opportunity to have a walking path that goes over to parking lots that are privately owned back on Wilson Way. Maybe talk to the property owners back there and see if something can be worked out for shared parking. Just think about making these activities and everything available to everybody. So that's the physical access, parking for everything. I think that's...
Right, we tried to add it to, so page 78 and 79. We have the goals on page 69, and then starting on page 77, where we have objectives under those goals. So we tried to add in under the open space and recreation goals about goal number 1 under open space adds more about fostering the handicap accessibility and inclusive in some of these items, specifically put in what the Commission on Disability had requested about identifying areas where accessible paved paths could be installed, provide large print and braille signage, install benches and resting places in strategic locations, some rope guides along trails, and consider all-terrain wheelchairs for use at some of the conservation areas. So we tried to add it more in the objectives without being too specific to exactly where, but tried to keep it as an objective under that goal.
So I think that's good. Like I just want to pull out these issues and see what we can incorporate. You need feedback from everybody soon, right? So
Yes.
Email to you.
Right. So we are looking for any comments. I only received specific comments from Dave, but if anyone else has specific comments. So right now we have...
Yeah, my comments were applied being part of the original part.
Committee. Brian was on the Open Space and Recreation Committee that met over the last year.
How does the CPA language look now when you moved it to the actions?
Where did it go?
I just want to make sure that it's going to be okay. Select.
Where did it was? So it's in the action plan on page 87 under General Goal 2. So we kind of placed it there as to investigate the feasibility of adopting the CPA as one potential funding source.
Okay, so it's investigate the feasibility.
Yes.
I think we can even go so far as to support it. But we can't make it a moratorium on whether or not the CPA passes at this
process?
Well, so in the action plan, it starts with your action item and then the responsible party. So we have the select board suggested in there.
The way that you have it stated.
Nora Lockney, Director of Community and Economic Development. I just want to point your attention to 2 pages that were also revised regarding the CPA, Community Preservation Act. Page 1 of the plan had a paragraph stating that a major recommendation of the Open Space Recreation Plan was the adoption of the Community Preservation Act. That's been removed. And on page 75, there's a section in the plan that discusses the Community Preservation Act, to explain what it is, and that has been revised to remove the clear preference of the Open Space Recreation Committee for adoption of that, to more describe what it is and not speak to adoption in the near future. So those are the major changes in that area.
Thank you.
Can I just make a general comment about the plan? One of the things I'm struggling with is, the plan, it's a good foundation, but it really only encompasses 5% of the population in terms of respondents. And when you look at the over 65 and over, if you calculate the percentages, only 38 people responded. So
For
we're
the
really
survey?
incorporating what they want.
Well, the survey was one source that we use. It was done pretty early in the process, a little over a year ago. The main purpose of the survey was general public opinion. Then we had the vision session. The vision session, that was important for the committee to sort of sit down, not the committee, it was hosted by the Open Space and Recreation Planning Committee. And that was open for anyone to come to and really discuss the issues, and that's where they looked at the goals of the existing plan. Are they still relevant, and what do they want to see going forward over the next several years? So that's where they kind of went through those exercises, and then the committee took that information to draft the plan that came before you. And on the Open Space and Recreation Committee, they had public meetings. They were all televised, and there was 21 members on the committee, and the members were selected from different specific areas representing different groups. So we had a member of the Land Trust, the school committee, Conservation Commission. We had 2 representatives from the planning board. Who else did we have on there? So the idea, we had people with this expertise, a member of the Recreation Commission there. So they were using their input and what they have heard and what they've seen in their experiences to create this plan. So it wasn't just a survey. It was relying on the committee to really pull this together. And they had a couple meetings where they put out the draft comments and asked for comments and went through those in the springtime.
I know that there was a conscientious effort, though, to make sure that we got respondents aged 18 and under. So I wonder if we should have pushed to get more 65 and over.
Well, and also we have a letter from the Council on Aging here that was, is this recent in response to this? So I think they're just saying there's nothing in the report that focuses on aging and disabled community. So it's, I think, looking for more things that serve that community.
If I could just make a couple of comments on that. The original survey was not only directly given to the Council on Aging, but paper copies were brought there, and there was assistance in helping residents fill out those forms. In addition, a Council on Aging representative was requested a half a dozen times to attend the Open Space and Recreation Planning Commission meetings. They chose not to. Despite that, we gave all the information about the plans, we televised the meetings, we discussed age-related issues, and the plan actually does include provisions for programming and recreational facilities directed to residents of all ages. It specifically recommends programming for residents who are senior citizens. So I did see that, that letter that was undated, just dated January, from the director of the COA. It doesn't appear that the plan was actually read before that letter was written. If it was, clearly the director didn't understand the plan or didn't note the sections in the plan that called for recreation opportunities for residents of all ages. The letter says that the plan is, I don't actually have it in front of me, but there was a statement saying that the plan is leading to, I guess, problems for senior citizens. Let me just pull up the letter so I can read exactly what it is.
It's the second to last page in this.
Yes, it says, this is a letter from Lena Arena DeRosa. Abby, I am writing to express my concern about the 2008 Open Space and Recreation Plan revised draft 2/11/18. As Director of the Council on Aging, I find that much of what is being considered would limit seniors who struggle with mobility issues, whether using a cane, a walker, or wheelchair, as well as those who are visually impaired. There's nothing in the plan that would cause limitations on seniors. In fact, the plan asks to remove limitations that are currently in place. Then the letter continues, generally speaking, I would recommend offering complete, not partial, accessibility for a number of Westwood's open spaces and recreation areas. Moreover, Westwood should consider a goal that would include accessibility for all. We had a representative on the Open Space and Recreation Planning Commission from the Disability Committee, Mary Ann Carty. She participated very well in every meeting, and these issues were discussed, and I believe they've been incorporated into the plan.
Talked about one of them.
Right. We discussed one that has been added to the open space section. We had included accessibility more in the recreation section than a specific goal under conservation. And I think the reason for that was that the format of the plan changed, and open space and recreation were broken out. Originally, it was a single list of goals, and then it was split into recreation goals and open space goals. So we've now added those provisions specifically under open space. I believe that addresses that. And then Lena goes on to say, unfortunately, there's nothing in the report that focuses on an aging and disabled community that would like to participate in both recreation and open space activities. That's patently untrue. There are provisions in the plan that are directed to seniors and disabled residents. If there's specific language that needs to be beefed up, we're more than happy to make those revisions. So I'm sending a letter to Lena requesting a specific revision, asking her to actually read the plan from cover to cover. And if there's a section that requires different language, we'd be happy to incorporate that and present it to your next hearing.
Yeah, and that's actually, in addition, at the indoor recreation facility, part of the discussion through that committee, we talked about that as an avenue for the aging, a place to go in the wintertime.
That's right. That's actually an important part of the plan. It was discussed many times at meetings throughout the better course of the last year when this plan was discussed. So I think every effort has been made.
This goes to town meeting and gets voted. When does it come up again, in 5 years or 10 years? How often does it?
Every
7 years. 7 years. So the only approval that's actually necessary on this plan is an approval from the Department of Conservation and Recreation. The process is to have the planning board adopt the plan because you are the planning organization. And then we have in the past requested town meeting endorsement. And the reason for that is that it's much easier to fulfill the goals of a plan if the community buys into the plan. So we offer them the opportunity at town meeting to endorse the plan. That also encourages the planning board and the committee that helped draft the plan to write the goals and the objectives and the action strategies with the community in mind so that you're only adopting goals, objectives, and strategies that you believe the community would support, knowing that it's going to town meeting for consideration of endorsement. So that's how we keep the checks and balances here and make sure that we're actually putting forth a plan that our community supports.
So when my comments earlier, I wasn't actually thinking of this letter, but I think it sort of illustrates the value in pulling those things out and making them very prominent because, as you're saying, the plan it has taken this into account, but that wasn't the impression one person had. And so I think by featuring that as a goal, as an explicit goal, will help to then make it clear that the plan is for everyone, and that's kind of should be for everyone.
Right, and it's a goal, there are specific objectives and action items as well. But I think really the problem there was just lack of participation on the committee. Had there been a participant, they would have been more engaged, would have reported back to the Council on Aging, and there would have been greater understanding of the document.
So the survey had 5% response? Is that what you said, Deb?
There was a total of 6%, so that calculated out to be about 38 respondents over 65.
And what was,
We had 809 responders, people respond overall.
Which is
For
by
whole
far
survey.
the largest response to any survey
say,
that's ever been conducted in the
ironically, it's going to
town.
go to town meeting and look for approval from what might be 175 people,
Yeah.
which is
We don't know how many
incredibly.
people actually took that survey more than once.
Right.
So that's,
No, we
it wasn't a
don't.
controlled survey, just as all the other surveys. It's difficult to. control.
Surveys are a single point of reference. I think what's
One data
important is
point.
that we had an appointed committee meet approximately monthly over the course of a year at open public meetings that were televised. We sought to include members of every represented group in that Open Space and Recreation Planning Committee, and now it's been before the Planning Board over the course of 3 separate hearing sessions. So anyone who has comments to make has a forum to make those comments. We've also made it clear in all of these televised meetings that anyone who can't attend the meetings is welcome to submit comments by email or by phone or even by mail. And we would make sure that those comments get to the Planning Board for consideration. So every effort has been made to make this as open a public process as we can have. The fact is, planning is not something that attracts the majority of residents in any community. It's not something that people line up to get involved in. So I think you're
agree.
seeing the participation level that we could expect.
I just think that it's an awful, we're going to be asking people to allocate a lot of money for what we have going forward. And is that going to satisfy the entire population? That's
So one of the
what I
things,
struggle with.
one of the things to keep in mind is the plan is not asking for money. That's an important factor to recommend, to realize that the open space recreation plan is setting broad range goals and objectives. It is not a funding document. It suggests the type of funding sources that could be considered. It has action items to be considered in the future. It's not a mandate. Nothing in this plan is required. What this plan is saying is that these are the goals for open space and recreation in our town. The plan first starts by analyzing the current situation in Westwood, determining what facilities and programming we have now, determining what needs are unmet, if there are unmet needs, determining what the future needs of the town would be, and then trying to set a path to come about achieving those. So that's what's in the plan. Any funding mechanism is treated completely outside of this. It should reference this. If a project comes forward, for instance, I heard some mention earlier of a skating rink. That's a possible outcome of this plan. So is another indoor recreational facility. So is lighting of the Thurston Fields, turf on the Thurston Fields. Those are all possible outcomes. None of them are required by the plan. They're suggested as something that would further the goals of the plan. But any of those items would have to go to town meeting to be considered for specific funding. They would be capital improvements, and town voters would have an opportunity to vote on them at that time. So supporting the endorsement of a plan is not the same as recommending that the town fund items that are in that plan. These are aspirational. They're trying to direct which way we should move.
I agree. I mean, I just think we need to make it very specific to let everyone know that.
I don't have any other comments to share for.
Did anyone from the audience like to speak on the, have comments to share? Please come to the podium and state your name and address and everything.
And Barry Goodfellow, 199 Fox Hill Street, co-chairman of the Westwood Disability Commission. You have my letter in your packet, and sort of apropos of Nora's comments, you know, we looked at the plan. Obviously, a lot of hard work went into preparing it, and we thought that it would be helpful to provide the exact sort of specificity that the Chairman Atkins was talking about, to sort of give people a little better idea of what kinds of things would provide access to individuals with disabilities and with senior citizens. As a broad measure, there are portions that are required under federal and state law. Massachusetts state law is actually very strict. It was, in many ways, it's a precursor to the ADA, so we have a lot of provisions that actually overlap with the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act. So there are specific requirements for physical access, specific requirements for program access. Those are one portion of the plan. Another portion of the plan is the aspirational principles that are being adopted here. What kind of community are we? Do we want everyone to participate in our open space, in our recreation programs? Or do we want it for weekend warriors, children, physically fit people? We want everyone to participate. We want our families with disabled children to be able to take a walk in the park with the dog and their non-disabled children. That's the concept of universal access. The mother with the stroller, the grandmother in a wheelchair, the individuals who maybe are a little unsteady on their gait after sitting for a couple of hours, naming no names. So we looked at it from both of those standpoints. And I can go through the letter, which is in your packet if you like, and go into some of the specifics. So we looked at, and by way of a little bit of a further background, as Nora said, Mary Ann Carty did participate in the discussions with Mr. Gorman in the Open Space and Recreation Planning Committee. The commission itself became more involved when we received a copy of the appendix on ADA compliance, which really caught our attention because it really had some issues that needed to be clarified. Missed some properties, overstated access in certain locations, and we thought, well, let's really contribute some clarity to what those requirements are. So I understand that's to be redone, or it's...
Right. I've provided your comments to our consultant that we used. The consultant was working on the ADA, the appendix included the ADA kind of evaluation form, like town evaluation form, and the transition plan. So I did give those comments to him to provide that update, but it was recently, today, yesterday.
Well, I had written to him in early January and didn't really, offered to meet with him, offered to discuss with him our concerns. The DCR does require an ADA evaluation and transition plan as part of this particular plan, and it's incomplete at this point. So I can identify certain of the items on that ADA plan, in our discussions, and these are by no means comprehensive because we really got it that came to us in December. We didn't meet until early January, so I didn't have much opportunity to do a whole lot of research. But, for instance, the access at Lowell Woods is blocked by a boulder that would prevent somebody who was fit. We have a lot of disabled veterans who are very agile using their wheelchairs. They have off-road wheelchairs, but they would not be able to get onto the path because of the boulder that blocks access to the path. And someone already mentioned that there is parking, but no handicap parking. Morrison Field lacks access to the softball field, lacks accessible seating at the field, and sort of paradoxically, the one accessible picnic table is not on an access path, which is sort of striking. The portable bathroom is not accessible, and there's no signage for visual impairment. I did meet with Nicole Banks of the Recreation Department to discuss the accessible portable bathrooms, and she said they're provided by the various sports teams. But, on the principle of universal access as well as disability access, if there's only one bathroom, the easiest thing is to make that bathroom be one of the larger accessible portable bathrooms. Then, our group said it's accessible to the grandparent in the wheelchair. It also lets the mother with the stroller not have to leave her stroller or her child out on the sidewalk using the restroom, and et cetera. Some people would be in the situation of having to take an elderly grandparent to the restroom. An accessible facility would allow them to do that. Again, that's sort of some of the things in the reality of universal access. A minor thing that the handicap parking space at Sheehan, to use it effectively, you'd be going the wrong way in the parking lot because in order to get in and out of the car, you need to be on the open side of the driveway. Dream Street Playground wasn't included. The swimming pool, which is a recreation facility, was not included. Some other public school facilities haven't been included, and there's no comment on accessibility in any of the conservation properties. The conservation properties in your big, long list of all the different properties says in large print, it provides public access. But really, all that means is that it is open to the public. It does not provide public access. Some communities do rank their properties by fully accessible, partially accessible, only accessible to pedestrians, whatever it might be. So you see that throughout the state. Different communities are really denoting how much access there are to different properties. And all users, hikers and others, would benefit by information on the characteristics of the trail, the length, the surface type, the width, the terrain. Some communities, again, have provided through a phone app, that kind of information readily accessible to any hiker, any person, wheelchair person using a wheelchair or any other type of thing. Other kinds of potential ideas that would provide access would be some communities provide what's called a beach wheelchair, which has very large wheels. That, in fact, one of our members, when her son was young, had one of these, and we went through the Lowell Woods. He was able to travel through the Lowell Woods using this. Braille, high contrast, and large print signage. Again, some of us really find that large print to be very, very handy. I've seen many of the Audubon properties. If you've gone out to Stony Brook, there's like there's posts and a rope between the posts that just lets someone with a visual impairment stick with that trail. We have some sensory opportunities up at Hale, I think. One of the Eagle Scouts had developed a sensory garden. So there's ways of providing access to the natural environment that is just really important for enjoyment, serenity, and participation with family. Already, I think it mentioned like the idea of benches or strategically placed boulders, rough-hewn fallen logs that would allow senior citizens and people of all ages to rest periodically on a trail. No need to change the trail, but that just gives people a chance to catch their breath. Highly desirable would be a level, packed or paved path around a pond that would provide, again, that universal access idea. We have Buckmaster, there's Haslam down off of Pleasant Valley, Lyman, which is actually used by the high school, so there's actually an issue there where that should be accessible. There may be other opportunities, and I think some other people from the Conservation Commission may know what other places might be suitable. There's an existing path from Martha Jones to Tamarack Road, which is used in some of the sort of nature exploration from Martha Jones School. That could be improved and provide universal access. And again, as I say, there may be other opportunities that we're not familiar with. Our point is just to say that universal access invites all Westwood residents to learn about and enjoy the social health and wellness opportunities provided by recreation and open space in the town. So I offer that to you for your further consideration. Thanks for your time and all of the time you spend helping plan what we'll take care of in the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it seems to me like a lot of that would fit nicely with this idea of having a management plan for every conservation space, and it's sort of having the goal to be these issues should be addressed. In the same way we have a complete streets policy, one could have a universal access policy.
So the plan does include those land management plans or use and management plans for all the conservation areas. The committee had originally talked about having similar plans for all the recreation facilities as well. The Recreation Committee representatives said that they were already past that. They had completed that work and did not feel it was needed to be put in the plan. But I'd say that's another area, another reason why we may want to add use plans, management and use plans for the recreation facilities as well, so that you can address universal design.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of my initial, when I first heard about this, one of my thoughts was how people are not aware of all the resources that are available in the town. And it's once you're aware of them, you may not be aware of how to access them. So I think it all fits into a good plan. Is there anyone else who would like to share their thoughts?
And Abby, those comments, are they with the consultant? Because I agree
did
with-
provide them today. I got the letter today, so I did provide that letter to the consultant. So I'll follow up with the consultant. I would defer to the consultant as the expert on the requirements of this portion of the plan. So I would review with him more where these items should be placed and located. So the appendix that we had was from December 11th, so it hasn't been updated since then. So that's what we were really looking for now, and we have that from the Disability Commission, so that's what I'm looking for too. So if any of you members, if you have specific comments, such as what the Commission on Disability has provided, that way we can clearly know where to put them into the plan, so we can work on updating those items on the plan. Or for now, if you want to discuss, but if you have any specific changes to these objectives and the content.
So if we get those to you, we should set a deadline, like by Friday, we have to give you our comments, and then you can give us the revised.
Ideally, I recommend by Monday, you could say by the end of the day on Monday, February 4th.
You mean this
I meant
Friday?
this Friday.
Okay, if you wanted, but if you needed the weekend, because I'm probably not going to update it on over the weekend.
Friday's the better day.
But then we could spend next week updating it, so we could get a revised one by Friday. What is that? The 8th, Friday, February 8th, so that we could get it posted, get it a revised copy up on the website and to you in time for your February 12th meeting. So by Monday the 4th, you could get any additional comments.
And we'll have a final draft Friday, the 8th of February, so then we'll study that over the weekend, and if there's anything else, get it to you on Monday morning, so that we can then review everything on Tuesday night, and hopefully have everything ready to. All right. I think that's it for that item.
All right, thank you.
The next item on the agenda, public hearing to amend planning board rules and regulations.
Oh, yes. Can you continue this hearing to your next meeting on the 12th? You have existing rules and regulations, and I haven't actually given you any suggested changes yet.
So actually, we need to continue the.
Oh, yes, open space hearing, yep.
So we need a motion to continue it to February 12th, right?
Yes.
So I make a motion to continue the hearing on the open space and recreation plan to February 12th at the same location, 7 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So that will be continued. Now we move on to a public hearing for the planning board rules and regulations.
All right, so the primary purpose of working on these is to no longer require paper copies. We've gone electronic. The planning board's applications are all submitted through a new online permitting software that we have, that the town has gone live with department by department. So the planning board went live last week. You'll still be getting your material the same way in this your packet form and PDF application submission form. And then just over the last couple of years, I think most of your rules and regulations are updated in 2015, 2016. So I'd like to propose some additional changes that maybe along the way we had some zoning changes that we'd like to make clear in your rules and regs. So if you can continue that also to your next meeting on the 12th, and I'll try to get you new red line versions for your next hearing.
So I make a motion to continue to Tuesday, February 12th at 7 p.m. at 50 Carby Street.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Olenoff, did you?
I did want to mention a few things about the subdivision rules and regulations. Something these things to think about.
Okay.
Steve Olenoff. I've been working on the subdivision rules and regulations for quite a while now.
So, technically, I'm just thinking we just voted
Yeah.
to continue it, so let's just reopen.
Open it, yeah.
So I make a motion to open the hearing.
Great.
All those in favor? Aye.
So, besides just correcting things and trying to get it up to date, there are like 3 issues that I think the board needs to take up on the subdivision rules and regulations. One is the subject that gets discussed every time practically is cul-de-sacs, and the other issue is sidewalks, and changing from asphalt to concrete sidewalks and then meandering sidewalks. So the first issue, which always seems to get discussed, is the 500-foot limitation on cul-de-sacs. And over the years, the planning board has always had this kind of formula, a procedure it goes through when someone wants to exceed the 500-foot length. And we don't ever the planning board has never exceeded the 500-foot length unless they can first show that they could do it without having that dead end. And secondly, they need to provide a emergency access from the end of the cul-de-sac. So I think it's time that we just, since we do this every time this comes up, we should just encode that in the subdivision rules and regulations, what we want to do and how we want to do it. So, to have the rules and regulations say that the 500-foot can only be waived if there is proof that you don't need, you could put a through road in, and then they provide a emergency access route, which is both ready, available, and also open to pedestrians. And in all cases, they should provide at the end of any cul-de-sac. If there's another cul-de-sac, another street where you could put a trail in to connect, especially to a public park or another cul-de-sac, another road, that should be done also. So that's the discussion we usually have, something like that. Usually the discussion has been, should it be increased at 500 foot? Should we eliminate, say, no cul-de-sacs, which some towns do? Or we should go for a bigger number, but that's always been recommended against that by the fire department, because 500 feet is the only safe length for a cul-de-sac if the street is blocked and fire apparatus can't get down to it. So I think we should encode those things that we've been doing right along, and so that's one issue for you to think about and to discuss. The next issue is sidewalks. The town has really gone over to using concrete sidewalks instead of asphalt sidewalks. We required only asphalt sidewalks. So should we change the subdivision rules and regulations to require asphalt sidewalks? The Public Works Director is definitely in favor of this. He wants only concrete sidewalks from now on because they're more durable, long-lasting, and actually easier to repair. The third issue has come up recently when at the for the new senior development in Winter Street and Clappertree Street. They're asking for a waiver to put in meandering sidewalks. And you look at the layout of the sidewalks, a lot of 90-degree right-angle turns in them, which don't make any sense. If you were walking, you don't want to. That's not the way you want to walk. So we shouldn't have to be have the developer ask for a waiver for meandering sidewalks. They should be allowed. So we should spell out how sidewalks and actually require them in any cases where you could put in a curving sidewalk instead of a right-angled sidewalk to do that. So those are the 3 things that I think the planning board needs to think about, and you can discuss them when this comes up, and we'll be getting other little changes, but those are the substantive changes. Any questions?
No, that sounds good, thanks.
I do, the 500-foot rule, that we always went off,
A recommendation from the fire chief.
Scoville,
on
but
That's the safest.
have we
distance.
asked Chief Deckers his opinion, as he now sits in that chair?
No, we haven't, so.
That might be
So I
something we
think
want to.
we have more discussion points that you
Yeah.
will want to talk about, specifically with the subdivision regulations. The other ones, site plan review and special permit, might be more minor changes, but I think you'll have more discussion points, these kinds of items. So I can check with the fire chief on that.
So it'd be interesting to see what he has to say, but I would think it shouldn't be dependent upon who the fire chief happens to be. If it really is anything longer than 500 feet is just not safe, then I think that that should be an issue that goes from one chief to the other. And this has been on, 500 feet's been there for an awful long time, I'm sure. It's probably even before Chief Scoville was.
But there are towns that don't employ that number restriction, and so we always deferred to Chief Scoville's feeling of what he felt comfortable with his men carrying things in and carrying people out if necessary, as using 500 as the benchmark.
Yeah.
So he's no longer in that seat, so I'm curious.
There must be a standard, like there must be a
Right.
rationale beyond just.
I think it really varies town by town. I don't think there's
It's not uncommon.
There ought to be.
Yeah, there may not be. I think over the many years, it seems to make a lot of sense, and it's been very effective in getting the kind of developments that we want in the town. So I think, so you can discuss, should it be more or less than 500 feet?
We need that new data point from our new chief, instead of just deferring to the man who's now retired and what his opinion was. So.
But no matter what you said after, I was going to ask for something more. So you still have the issue of the emergency access.
Okay. So do I have a motion to continue this public hearing to the 12th?
I make a motion to continue the hearing to Tuesday, February 12th at 7 p.m. at 50 Carvey.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that is continued. Let's see, do you have anything else that's scheduled? Any other?
No other action items, just some other business items.
I wanted to ask you, this is a new type thing, but yeah, I saw there's been concern in some communities about restricting the sale of vaping products, and I had asked about kind of what was Westwood's policy, and it kind of, the health department in other towns has controlled that. We have regulations for that, but what are the, is it something within our control to say ban the sales of tobacco or vaping products, or kind of is there a role for the planning board to play in that, or is it where you're?
Zoning regulates the use, and that would fall under retail sales use, so you can't prohibit retail sales. Our tobacco products are regulated through the Board of Health, so they do that licensing. We have, I think, 4 establishments in town that regulate the sale of tobacco products, but we can't blanket prohibit retail sales by zoning. We had the special exception recently, a year ago, 2 years ago, with marijuana that could be prohibited, and that was only allowed through a town election. So we had a special election that specifically asked that question, but that was specifically allowed in the state laws. Otherwise, you can't
Specific to
zone it out.
marijuana.
Right, specific to recreational marijuana.
You can't just hold an election every year when you come up with
Right.
something new I want to ban.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the issue. It's considered a retail sales use. So you would
Is it a separate use, like, so a retail use versus a store that's only, like there are some smoke shops that are 21 or over? Is that something that's possible in the same zones and everything, or is it all, I guess you're saying it's not within our, if the town were to pass a bylaw that said, that affected this, is that something the town could do, or that we would come through our process of?
No, not that I know of, no. I think the town already is doing all that it can do legally. Westwood does require that you have to be 21, at least 21 years of age to buy the tobacco. That was adopted a few years ago, so that's been in place. I don't think you could have a zoning regulation. We just do our best to discourage it.
So right now, basically anyone who sells cigarettes is also able to sell vaping. Is that how the use
Yes.
works?
Yeah,
And we have 4 in town that are currently
but it's licensed
able to do
through
that.
the Board of Health
Right.
regulations. So they have their detailed regulations, but it's not detailed in our zoning bylaw.
Right.
I could just add one more thing on that. So Westwood was one of the first towns that actually raised the age for tobacco products to 21. We did that back in 2014. And then last year, we were one of the first towns to prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products. The only products with flavors that are permitted are menthol and mint, because those are federally protected. We're not permitted to restrict the use of those flavors or the sale of those flavors. So the 4 stores in Westwood that sell tobacco products can only sell plain menthol or mint tobacco. They can't sell any other flavored, and they can only sell to people over 21. The Board of Health and the health agents are very careful to monitor those and make sure that there are no underage sales. When there have been in the past occasionally underage sales, and the restrictions are severe. The seller loses the right to actually sell the product. We'll also note that Abby mentioned we have 4 facilities. I think at one point there were 8. They are dropping. There are fewer retail establishments that are interested in selling tobacco products. We do not want to do anything that would further restrict the sale of flavored products to a vape shop, because we don't have vape shops right now, and we don't want to do anything that would encourage them. We want to discourage all tobacco use in town, while still allowing the licenses that are currently in place under the restrictions that the Board of Health imposes. We don't want to do anything that invites a new business to come in and set up a vape shop. And if we did what I think you referred to, a petition that references something that was done in Somerville, where they have restricted those flavored sales, including mint and menthol, which they may or may not be able to do. There's a lawsuit pending on that, I believe. They have restricted it to over 21 vape clubs. They have them. We don't. So if we were to restrict that, we would be in violation by restricting it to a use that's not available in the town. And what it would do is just simply invite someone to open up a vape shop in a retail area.
Thank you, Nora. All right, I don't have anything else on that. Abby, is there any updates or?
Let's see, other general updates. Islington Center redevelopment. You've probably seen the site has been demolished. The parking area is still open. The owner is still investigating how to proceed with the Blue Heart Tavern. No final plan has been submitted or approved yet, so that's still being considered. Has not been, no plans have been approved, and it's still in its same location. So that will be then probably the next item that will come up for discussion, and then after that, the next building permit that will probably come in soon will be, the next one would be the CVS building. So we don't have that yet. I did receive a request today for a modification to be reviewed administratively for the underground drainage that is underneath the shared parking area between CVS and CVS and the municipal lot. There's underground infiltration system there that was approved. They've encountered ledge, so they've asked for it to be shifted and relocated. So I still need to review that, and I need to review that with Phil for engineering to make sure that the engineering is it still performs and functions the same way as according to the approved plans. And then a second part of the modification request was to remove some trees, 4 trees in a small area in that open space area behind the municipal lot. There was a request to do some grading work because there was discovered some fill that had been dumped there over time. And with the removing of this fill that's not clean, there's some grading work that needs to be done, and then some of these trees to be removed. So I did ask for those trees to be replaced. I still need to review that request, but my review, I would require that the trees be replaced. I think it was 8 trees total, that those 8 trees be replaced with in kind or better trees. The Conservation Commission didn't meet on this. I think they approved it, last week. So the conservation agent did go out, and those trees are flagged right now. So I'd request those trees, new trees, to be replaced. So I still have to review that a little bit more. Just letting you know, if you have any other comments on that, you can share them with me in my review. I still need to review it more with Phil for the engineering work. And I did talk to Karen, the conservation agent, earlier, that they approved the request.
When you replace them in like, what the phrase you used was, does that mean they have to be mature trees, or are they younger trees, or?
I could specify. Usually we require
larger,
4.
then they don't take as much. So they have
Yeah.
to, there's actually a specific, like 6-inch caliper or 8-inch that are most appropriate to bloom.
We generally recommend 4 inches. So 4 inches is what I could say, replace with 4 inches. I think our subdivision rules say 3 inches, but our 4 inches on our zoning. So that's what we had required before. So I could specify that 4-inch caliper, which is around 3 to 4 is what it's usually recommended to grow the best. So I'll include that.
Comprehensive plan.
Comprehensive plan. I'm getting back to this. I know we're, so we are a little bit behind schedule. I think maybe our initial schedule was a little bit ambitious. We're being a little, but we are still working on securing consultant, so then we can set that vision session date. So that hasn't been determined yet. And then the survey is expected soon. So that will be another survey that first the committee needs to review. I have a draft, and I need to get that out to the full committee for them to review before it goes out. So we don't have much of an update yet on that. Do we have any others? Oh, and then we did file an appeal on Friday. This was of Top Golf, so it was Planning Board and Board of Selectmen as jointly filed that. So this is Top Golf and Canton. So we did file that on Friday, which was the last day that we could appeal. And the premise was because we weren't properly notified for the public hearing, where we would have wanted to have time to review, particularly the traffic report, and we would have had Beta Group review it and provide comments. So we have that appeal. So I think.
If I could, Special Counsel Dan Bailey gave me something to read into the record about Top Golf, and then a specific motion to request. So if I may read that. In October 2018, the Canton Zoning Board of Appeals approved special permits for a Top Golf facility at 777 Dedham Street in Canton. The proposed Topgolf facility will have 463 parking spaces, is within 1,000 feet of the Westwood town line, and is 1/3 of a mile from the University Avenue Canton Street intersection. Westwood's Planning Board never received notice of the Canton Zoning Board of Appeals public hearing, nor a copy of the approved special permit decision. On January 25th, the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen filed a joint appeal in Land Court challenging the Topgolf special permits. We now need to affirm that action at a public meeting. So there's a request for a motion as follows: that the Planning Board affirm its approval that Pierce Atwood LLP file an appeal of the Topgolf special permits in Land Court. Anyone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
Would someone like to second that?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
What would happen? Do we have any, it would be more informational if they'd given us notice, we could have found out about it, but we don't have a vote against what another town is doing generally, right?
Well, we could take action as a town against them, just like Canton took action against the Cabot and Forbes Westwood Station. So yeah, I don't think anyone's really opposed to this project per se. It's just they didn't follow the process. And so we had no seat at the table that we're owed. So, and I mean, 460-some parking spaces, they're expecting a lot of people. And right now, the only way to get there is to come through our University Station off of 128. That is the only way to get there off 128. Coming from the south, someday soon, hopefully you'll be able to get off 95 North. But even coming from the south right now, until they build that 95 North off-ramp, you have to go all the way to University Station exit. So it clearly impacts traffic in Westwood.
All right, do we have any other items?
No, that's it. I'm sorry, I didn't get out the minutes, so next time.
Would someone?
I make a motion to close the meeting?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
You're adjourned.